Here we are on Tuesday of Holy Week, and yesterday we were looking at the triumphal entry, and so today, on the following day, we're in Mark 11 verses 12 to 14 and then 15 to 17. So on the following day, this is the day after the triumphal entry, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry, Jesus was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. And then he came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." This is the word of God. So if we take the triumphal entry to be on the Monday, I just am, then on the Tuesday morning, Jesus with his disciples left Bethany, which was where they were staying for the week, and went into Jerusalem for the day. Two things are told to us about what Jesus did this day. Firstly, the fig tree is cursed as they were going into Jerusalem. And secondly, Jesus cleanses the temple. So in this message, we'll be looking at the fig tree being cursed. So in the morning, on the way into Jerusalem, we read that Jesus was hungry, which shows us that he was not just a spiritual being, but also a human being. Anyway, being hungry, he looks around for something to eat, and because it is in full leaf, it's a bit easier to see, he sees a fig tree in the distance. And now this fig tree has caused so many problems for Christians and non-Christians alike when they hear this story. One problem comes when we hear Mark telling us Jesus found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And we're going, whoa, hang on a bit. Jesus was being so unreasonable here. Bit of a temper tantrum, acting like a petulant child. Surely a loving, patient God would not act like this. Not so holy now, is he? And surely if Jesus is God, then shouldn't he know that it wasn't the season for figs? It wasn't the fig tree's fault that it wasn't the right season, so why should Jesus curse it? It's just not right or fair, is it? Well, actually, let's have a look. So, the problem is, if we think like this, then we do not understand fig trees and how they work. So let's have a look at fig trees. Now, Mark actually helps us here. He is trying to help us rather than not help us. And how he helps us is to try to make us understand what's going on. And he does this because he tells us some very important information. He says that it was not the season for growing figs, which actually is the bit that seems to have got us into a whole lot of trouble. But what's he mean by this? Well, okay. Well, Passover, time of year it is, March-ish, yeah, is about 5 or 6 weeks before the fully formed fruit appears, the actual, what we would call a fig. But what we have here is a fig tree in full leaf. If the fig tree is full of leaves, then going with the leaves, accompanying the leaves, should be something called breva or taksh. Forgive my pronunciation. And what this breva or taksh is it's an early crop of fruit found on the fig tree with the leaves. Then 5 or 6 weeks later, the real figs should appear. So what Jesus was looking for, and unfortunately didn't find, was not the main crop of figs. it was the forerunner to the figs, which was something called brever or tax, which is like a yeah, it's just a not quite a bud, but it's a fruit in its own right, but it's an early crop of fruit found on the tree when the leaves are there. So what we should know is that if this forerunner to the fruit, this brever, this tax, does not appear, then that means that the fig tree will not then, in 5 or 6 weeks' time, produce its main harvest of real figs. So, hopefully you're still with me, when Jesus saw that the fig tree had leaves, he was rightfully expecting to find the early fruit to eat. Yeah, this brever or tax or whatever, yeah, how you pronounce it. But the fig tree lacked this early fruit. So what he then knows is, if you know anything about fig trees, is that if the leaves are there, but there's no pre-fruit, then that tree would not be producing the main harvest that year. At that moment, when Jesus went up to it, expecting to find early fruit or pre-fruit or brever or tax, not the main fig that was going to come in 5 or 6 weeks' time, he knew that it would not bear fruit. Okay? And so hopefully now are you beginning to see why Jesus then cursed the fig tree? It's a living parable to a certain extent. And Luke actually has it as a parable. So Jesus had come to his own people. He came expecting them to see if his people Israel were fruitful, were bearing fruit. Were they bearing fruit or were they barren and dry? He should have found Israel as a great and holy nation. Like the prophet Hosea said, when it was in its first fruits of the days of its fathers, read in Hosea chapter 9 verse 10, like grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel. Like the first fruit on the fig tree in its first season, I saw your fathers. You see what Hosea is saying? Like the first fruit. He's talking about that brever, that tax. Yeah, not the main. So what he knows is that this is a tree that's in leaf, and he sees that the tree's got the first fruit, and then that's what Hosea is saying. This is how it was in the beginning. Just like that, we saw that first fruit on the fig tree. It's going to come, and it's going to come into blossom, and it's going to bear fruit. But then if we read a few verses later in Hosea chapter 9 verse 16, we read that the people had consecrated themselves to a shameful idol. So they would be blighted, their root is withered, and they yield no fruit. So it's a living parable here. Okay? It's not just Jesus hungry, having a bit of a temper tantrum because he can't get fed. It's a living parable. So Jesus comes and he sees that they are spiritually dead. There is no sign of spiritual fruitfulness among his own people, nor is there likely to be any fruit coming forth in the future. And Jesus tells quite a few parables about this, and I remember one of the things he says was they're like whitewashed tombs. They look good on the outside, but inside they are rotten and dead. Their religion looks good from the outside. They've got their priests looking splendid, offering the sacrifices. They've got the temple in all of its glory. They've got the law. But at the core, it's rotten. There's no faith, no love, no spirituality, no holiness. And Jesus, their Messiah, has now even come to them, and they reject him. Therefore, he will bring destruction upon them. And this will be explained more tomorrow on the Wednesday of this week. But with this lived out parable, Jesus then makes his way to the temple. And he knows what he will find there, because remember, yesterday, after his triumphal entry, he went to the temple, he looked in on what they were doing, and he then left. Jesus knows his people, and he's found them dead, not bearing fruit. And so therefore, that you see how the fig tree is a living parable. It's a real life living parable. We're going to stop there, and we're going to record another message about Jesus cleansing the temple. So if this is your first one, you can now click on to Jesus cleansing the temple. If it's your second one, you've already watched Jesus cleansing the temple, that's great, that doesn't matter. But I'll be back again tomorrow with more. But until then, take care and God bless.